Dallas about this. Kirby, tell us about Probe Ministries, and then we'll get back into this topic and take our phone calls.
Sure. Well, they can go to probe.org to find some of the material. Also, as you've pointed out before, I host a show called Point of View, and pointofview.net is where we've posted a lot of these articles I've been mentioning about gun control. And, of course, this week we've really been promoting that tomorrow we really hope a lot of people will show up at Hobby Lobby and support them in light of the fact that they're being fined by the federal government $1.3 million simply because they won't provide abortifacients to their 13,000 employees. So just to encourage people
Tomorrow's
to
support
them
Hobby
as well.
Lobby Day. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. We need. I didn't do enough of that promotion there. Real quickly before we go to our calls, what about what you think President Obama is going to try to do with respect to gun control in the next month?
You know, on the front page today of USA Today, it says gun push opens new Congress. So it's obvious it's being pushed. First of all, I think the president's going to get behind the bill that has been filed or will be filed by Senator Dianne Feinstein. And if indeed that is the case, then it's going to be a kind of deja vu all over again because she wants to re-implement the assault weapon ban, which would be for semi-automatic rifles that she designates are dangerous, and they have all sorts of criteria for that. It also would ban 10 magazines that hold more than 10 rounds. I don't think the president's going to go as far as Senator Feinstein in requiring that every gun owner be licensed by the state, but I do believe that he will try to push forward some of these legislative actions. And we've already done this once and recognized that it really had no impact. Most of these shootings are not done with weapons that would be identified as assault weapons. Even in Connecticut, to use that example, there is an assault weapon ban, but it would not have covered the AR-15 that Adam Lanza used anyway. So I think that's the push. There may be some others for registration, for further background checks and the rest, but I think that's what he's going to come out for.
We go first to Diane in Frankfort, Indiana. Hi, Diane.
Hello there.
How are you today?
Well, I'm just fine. I wanted to call because I have a nephew who's mentally ill. He's bipolar and schizophrenic. And it's very difficult for families to deal with. Very difficult. Unless you've been a part of that, a member of that kind of a family, you have no idea the consequences of that. In fact, most people who are mentally ill, severely mentally ill, have no families because their families cannot deal with that mental illness. My nephew has told me that the voices in his head have told him to kill people, but not with guns, with knives, or to douse them in gasoline and set them on fire. So I don't think that taking guns away from them is going to keep them from killing people. I think these nasty semi-automatic weapons, I don't see anybody having need of those, but I think that every individual has a right to have, if they're a hunter, if they get a license and hunt, they should have a right to a hunting gun. And I like firearms. I'm a good shot with one. But I can't see the need of having more than one handgun. So I think the number should be severely limited and could be, and I think that would help. You're never going to get rid of guns because if you take them away from the good people, the bad people are still going to have them if they have to make them themselves.
Yeah. Okay, Diane, thanks for your comments. We appreciate it. Thank you for calling from Indiana. And I know I sympathize with her. She's talking about dealing with
unbelievably difficult situation.
Yeah. I understand. And I'm sure that's what probably that lady who died in Connecticut, her son was the one who was the killer.
Sure.
He was probably struggling because you got to prove to the authorities that the person is an imminent danger to themselves or to others, and that's often hard to prove, to get them committed.
She was struggling, and she was desperate.
Yeah. David in Odessa, Texas. Hi, David.
Hello, how are you?
Good. Thank you for calling. Go right ahead.
Hey, thank you very much. Just one quick point. Pardon me. I wanted to say that I'm concerned with the proposed solutions from both sides on this. I consider myself a progressive liberal. However, I'm a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. I own guns. I hunt. I'm concerned with the Democrats' issue about gun control. I believe that if the police and the military are the only ones that have guns, that's a bad sign.
Right.
Yet what the Republicans have mentioned so far, and what your guest also mentioned, I'm concerned with the civil liberties involved with labeling someone mentally ill. and trying to somehow use the power of the state to give them treatment to stop them before they commit a crime. One point that I want to make real quick is that there already seems to be an effective solution that I don't hear anyone talking about. And, you know, I have not heard of a shooting in a courthouse or a government building in over 10 years. And so armed guards and locked doors seem to work. So I don't know why we're talking about extreme measures like disarming the populace or affecting people's civil liberties when we already have laws that say that mentally ill, dangerous people can't have guns. There's already a solution that works. Are guards and locked doors. Okay. And I just wanted to point out that when I'm from Salt Lake City, I was in a dollar movie theater a couple of weeks ago. There was an armed sheriff's deputy in the lobby. If we can have an armed sheriff's deputy at a dollar movie theater, I don't understand why we couldn't have someone at a grade school.
Yeah. Okay, David. Very good. Thank you for your call.
You bet.
Kirby, you want to comment on that?
Let me just pick up one point, and that is they were just saying yesterday when the kids came back to the new Sandy Hook school, it was the safest school in America because we had armed forces there. Now, I agree with David, locked doors are good, but in the other shooting, in the original Sandy Hook back on the 14th, there was a locked door, and he actually shot his way through a door and a window in order to get in. So sometimes even those places that are relatively secure can be breached. But I think the point's well taken. I mean, how many times have you seen a burglary take place at a gun show? Not very often. And how many times have you seen shootings that take place in the middle of an airport or in a courtroom where, of course, we require people to go through metal detectors? I'm not so sure we want to put up metal detectors everywhere, and I'm not sure America's ready to have armed guards at every school, but we do know it works, and that's something to talk about as well.
I think you're going to see probably schools, Ray, move to some schools and move to a situation where you allow for the principal or the vice principal for some staff member at an administrative level to have a gun in their drawer.
Look, Tim, don't we wish that at Sandy Hook, when he came bursting through, don't we wish somebody had been there with a gun that to end it before it ever got started,
before he ever went in that kindergarten class? Yes, absolutely, and that's what I'm saying. Either have an armed guard or a security guard, if you will. And I'm wondering about whether they maybe need to be plainclothed in most cases.
It really partly is a question, Kirby, isn't it a question of money and logistics, whether that's even even feasible to do that?
One suggestion I have heard that makes some sense is that you have a number of people in law enforcement that are in one way or another on leave or they're considered disabled. In other words, they don't have the physical ability to be out there on the beat, but they're the kind of person that still has had arms training and probably could sit behind a desk and probably is already receiving a disability check or something like that, but still could be a deterrent as well. So there's a way in which maybe you wouldn't have to have a full-time plainclothes or in uniform officer, but you could have something that at least says to anybody out there, this is no longer a gun-free zone, and thus, as we just pointed out, even people that are, quote, mentally ill, and I don't like throwing that term around because I think it's thrown around entirely too much, but let's just use it for a moment. Even those people make rational decisions about where to go. They don't go into a gun show and shoot it up.
Right.
They don't go into a police station and try to shoot it up. They go into places that they know are gun-free zones.
We'll go to Robert in Livingston, Texas. You're up next. Go ahead, Robert.
Yes, sir. Glad to be here. I'd just like to say y'all made some very valid points, and that we do know what works. People with weapons that can counteract terrorism and things of that nature, and that many times these politicians are just patiently waiting in the wings to use the First Amendment to attack the Second Amendment.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm glad that there's programs on the air that recognize what's going on, and I just wanted to say y'all keep up the good work.
Thank you, Robert. Appreciate it. You're listening to the radio program Today's Issues on the American Family Radio Network. Our website is afr.net. We do have a Facebook page for this show, Today's Issues. I'm Tim Wildman with Ray Pritchard, and our guest is Kirby Anderson from Dallas. Kirby is with Pro Ministries. He also has his own radio talk show called Point of View, and it's on weekdays. And we're continuing to talk about gun control, but because it will be a big issue in the news in the next few weeks, few months, because of what happened in Connecticut at the Sandy Hook Elementary School. And, so many of these issues, I know a lot of our listeners agree with me on this, Kirby and Ray. I just don't see the federal government. I get tired of them wanting to think they got to address every single issue out there that comes up. You know what I'm saying? We don't need it. In my view, we don't need a national gun control law. All right. Unless you want to talk about things like airports or things like, that would involve interstate commerce or things of that nature.
Federal courtrooms, places like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. That's an appropriate place for the federal government to inject itself. I can understand that. But other than that, leave these gun laws to the states. People can take care of them. States can take care of themselves. They can govern themselves.
Connecticut can pass their laws.
Yeah,
Texas
let them have
can
their
pass
own laws.
theirs. Yeah.
Yeah. Kirby, you.
I agree. I believe in federalism. The only thing for those of us that are gun owners, it is kind of confusing because we have this patchwork quilt, whereas concealed carry is okay in one state. As soon as I get in a car and drive to another state, I have to think, okay, is that what are the rules and regulations there? So,
True.
But I'd rather have the patchwork quilt than have the federal government every time we turn around telling us in the states and us as individuals what we need to do in our own situations.
Hey, Kirby, before all of our time runs out, I want to ask you about the video game question. That's very much in this. We know video games, some of them are extremely violent, extremely graphic. Is there any connection, any relationship between teenagers, young adults playing these violent video games and murder or any of these school shootings?
Well, and I would have to say that one of the guests that, if you haven't had him on in a while, we've certainly had him on our program, Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman. Now, he wrote a book years ago about killing because he actually teaches that. He used to be a professor at West Point and talked about how they could increase and really teach individuals to be more effective at shooting and killing. And in the military, that's what you want to do. Well, then he went from West Point to Arkansas State, right there in Jonesboro. And that's where you had one of the school shootings. And he was one of the first people on the campus and then later gave expert testimony in the shooting in Paducah, Kentucky. And his new book, which is entitled Stop Teaching Our Kids to Kill, says that, when he began to look at some of these violent point-and-shoot video games, they were essentially identical to some of the simulators they were using in the Army and even what sometimes they use in the Marines. And he's saying, we are training kids through desensitization, through operant conditioning and other kinds of things to be very effective killers. And to use the examples that he uses, these two kids that were shooting in Arkansas, they really had very little gun training, and yet they were very accurate in the number of kids that they were able to kill. And that's because, in a sense, they'd been trained on the video game. But then when he went and actually testified for the case in West Paducah, Kentucky, this is an individual that had never shot a gun, and yet he fired 8 times and had 5 headshots, and I think he hit 7 out of 8 and he'd never shot a gun. Well, where did he learn using headshots? Well, he learned it in the video games. Now, does that mean that every kid that plays a violent video game is going to be a shooter? No. But does it mean that these are essentially simulators? Yes, they are.
Yeah, I think